to understand people. But nothing prepares you for the moment you walk into a law office and watch your former daughter-in-law celebrate your ex-husband's death like she just won a televised game show. I sat in that polished wood conference room, surrounded by relatives who had not spoken to me in years, as the attorney cleared his throat and announced the inheritance. Brooke Harrison, my son's glamorous ex-wife, gasped dramatically before the words had even fully left his mouth. 7 beachfront estates in Florida, 7 luxury properties, 7 glittering symbols of wealth and status that she had dreamed about since the day she married my son. And then came my name. 1 warehouse. A 40,000 square foot building on the outskirts of a small town in Arkansas. No applause, no gasps, just a few pitying looks from people who had never once pitied me when it might have mattered. Brooke held the deed papers up to her face like she had won a crown. She took selfies. She hugged people she barely knew. She told the attorney that she needed marketing photos for what she called her new empire. My son Jacob sat beside her, silent and ashamed, unable to meet my eyes. What none of them understood, not Brooke, not her cheering audience, not even my sweet but lost son, was that my ex-husband had always been more complicated than they realized. And as I watched the celebration unfold, something inside me settled into place. Let them applaud the mansions. Let them plan yacht parties and rooftop photo shoots. They had no idea what Richard Collins had really done, and they certainly had no idea what he had left behind for me. Today, the game they were all playing had only one rule. The obvious treasure is rarely the real one. The moment the attorney finished reading the list of inheritances, the atmosphere in the room shifted into something nearly theatrical. Brooke rose from her chair, as if she had been waiting her entire life to perform this scene. Her heels clicked across the floor, sharp and deliberate, like she was walking a runway instead of standing in a law office surrounded by grieving family members. She held her phone high, capturing videos and snapping pictures with the deed folders spread dramatically across her arms. Behind her, cousins and distant relatives gathered to congratulate her, offering smiles that looked more rehearsed than sincere. It was a celebration that had nothing to do with love or loss, and everything to do with the illusion of sudden wealth. I stayed seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the room transform into a place where humiliation was not accidental. It was entertainment. Brooke glanced at me with a smile that carried enough sweetness to rot sugar. I am sure this is difficult for you, Mary. But I promise we will keep you involved. Maybe you can help organize the storage area for one of the houses. You always were practical? Practical. The word translated easily enough. It meant plain. It meant small. It meant someone who patched things instead of replacing them. Someone who did not belong in Brooke's world of curated perfection. Jacob shifted uncomfortably beside her, his shoulders tense. He looked like he wanted to speak, but the weight of Brooke's hand resting on his arm seemed to silence him before he even tried. He had always been good at avoiding conflict, especially with her. The attorney cleared his throat and attempted to continue, but the noise in the room grew louder. People whispered, laughed, and speculated about which mansion Brooke would renovate first. No one cared about mineral rights. No one cared about Arkansas. No one cared about me. But I watched. Quietly. Carefully. I watched Brooke celebrate something she did not understand, and watched my son swallow his pride because he did not know what else to do. As I stood to leave, the room fell unusually still. I offered a small, polite smile and said, "Congratulations, everyone. I hope you enjoy what you think you have gained." Then I walked out, leaving behind a chorus of confusion, envy, and whispers that would soon turn into something far more desperate. 18 months before the will reading, I received a phone call I will never forget. Richard's name appeared on my screen, and for a moment I wondered if he had dialed me by mistake. Our conversations had become brief and courteous over the years, nothing more than the polite exchanges of two people who once shared a life but no longer shared a home. "Mary, do you have time to meet?" His voice sounded strained, almost fragile, not over the phone. In person. There was something in his tone that pushed away every hesitation. We agreed to meet in a small roadside diner outside a quiet town in Arkansas, the same town where the old warehouse stood. When I walked inside, I barely recognized him. Richard had lost weight, and the confident posture he always carried seemed to have shrunk into the corners of his body. He looked up with a tired smile and gestured for me to sit. "I am sick, Mary, heart condition. They say I have a year, maybe 2. The words hit harder than I expected. For all our differences, Richard had been a large part of my life. Hearing that he was counting his remaining time and months made something ache inside me. He reached for a folder on the table, his hands shaking slightly. "I need to talk to you about Jacob. He is a good man, but he has never faced real consequences. I gave him too much. I protected him from everything. And Brooke," his voice trailed off. "Brooke does not love him, Mary. She loves what he might inherit." Richard laid out documents across the table: bank statements, property records, maps, geological surveys. I stared at the 7 Florida houses first. They were beautiful, but every single one carried heavy mortgages, insurance premiums, and maintenance costs that would swallow Jacob whole. It was a trap dressed up like a gift. Then Richard handed me another stack: water purity studies, mineral assessments, corporate letters of intent. They all pointed to the same truth. Beneath the old warehouse was a freshwater source so valuable that 3 major companies had already drafted long-term extraction contracts. "This warehouse is worth more than everything else I own combined," Richard said quietly. "And you are the only person I trust to manage it. The only one who will not waste it." He looked at me with a sadness I had never seen in his eyes. "I need you to help me give our son the one thing I never taught him: wisdom, real wisdom." In that moment I understood. Richard was not planning revenge. He was planning salvation. 2 days after the will reading, I finally sat alone in my small kitchen, the sealed envelope Richard had left for me resting on the table, like a weight I had not been ready to lift. His handwriting was still the same: steady, precise. A man who had always planned 10 steps ahead, even when life refused to cooperate. I opened it carefully, unfolding 3 pages filled with the voice I knew better than my own. "My dear Mary, if you are reading this, then the noise of the inheritance has already begun. Brooke is probably celebrating like she won a beauty contest, and Jacob is probably trying to convince himself that everything will be fine. It will not be fine, not yet, but it will be." I felt a tightness build in my chest as I continued. "I did not make these decisions out of cruelty. I made them because I failed our son in ways I cannot undo. I gave him comfort when I should have given him responsibility. I gave him ease when I should have given him challenges. I let him believe that money could fix everything. And Brooke saw that weakness. She saw it long before he did." Richard's words were not bitter. They were tired. Honest. The kind of honesty that only comes when a person knows time is running out. "The 7 houses are drowning in debt, Mary. I bought them using leverage that would make any careless person crumble. I knew Brooke would celebrate them. That is her nature. I also knew Jacob would follow her lead. That is his weakness." I looked at the next paragraph and the air left my lungs. "The warehouse is the real inheritance. The aquifer beneath it will produce royalties for decades. You understand its value, you understand restraint. I trust you in ways I could never trust anyone else." Enclosed with the letter was a small silver key. The label: First National Bank. Safety Deposit Box 118. Inside he wrote, "You will find everything you need. Contracts, rights, agreements that will activate 90 days after my death, enough to secure your life and, eventually, Jacob's, once he learns the difference between wanting and deserving." Richard ended the letter the same way he had ended so many conversations during our marriage. "Do what you think is right, Mary. You always have." I folded the letter slowly, feeling the weight of a future he had built quietly, deliberately, and entirely for the son who would not understand it until everything else fell apart. 3 weeks after the will reading, my phone rang just after sunset. Jacob's name flashed across the screen, and for a brief moment I hoped he was simply calling to talk. But the second I answered, his voice told me everything. "Mom, something is wrong. I think Dad made a mistake." It was the tone of a man standing on a ledge, staring down at consequences he never expected to face. He explained that the first round of tax notices had arrived that morning. 7 properties in Florida meant 7 sets of property taxes, insurance premiums, and maintenance fees. And they were not small amounts. The numbers added up so fast he could barely say them out loud. $90,000 a month, Mom. Just to keep everything running. That's more than I earn in 5 months. Brooke, of course, had a different reaction. She brushed aside the growing panic with the ease of someone who had never balanced a budget in her life. She told him rich people use loans to pay for things. She told him appearances mattered more than numbers. She told him not to think so negatively. But negativity was not the issue. Math was. Over the next few weeks, the situation spiraled. Contractors Brooke hired demanded deposits. Designers sent invoices for furniture priced like small cars. Brooke insisted on a yacht-themed party to celebrate the Collins legacy. Meanwhile, Jacob was quietly draining every savings account he had, trying to keep up. Then the bank sent the foreclosure warnings. 3 properties were seized almost immediately. The others were placed on a fast track for forced sale because Jacob could no longer cover the monthly payments. He begged Brooke to consider selling early before things got worse, but she refused, insisting that selling would make them look poor. The day the last foreclosure notice arrived, Brooke packed her things and walked out. She filed for divorce the next morning, demanding half of whatever might be left, plus spousal support, plus repayment for the debts she claimed she incurred for their future. That night, at 2:41 in the morning, Jacob called me again. His voice was thin, exhausted, the sound of someone who had run out of ways to pretend everything was fine. "Mom, I'm staying at a motel near the airport. I have $97 left. Brooke took the rest. I don't know what to do." For the first time in his life, my son had nothing to lean on but the truth. And the truth was exactly what Richard had intended him to face. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I was already on the road. Jacob had barely slept, his voice worn down to the edge of breaking. He kept insisting he did not want to be a burden. He kept apologizing for things he did not yet understand. But there are moments when a mother does not wait for permission. This was one of them. I drove straight to the motel where he was staying. When he stepped outside, carrying a single duffel bag filled with everything he owned, the sight nearly fractured me. He looked older. Thinner, like someone who had been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. "Come with me, Jacob. We are going to Arkansas." He hesitated, glancing at the faded car he now drove instead of the luxury SUV Brooke had claimed in the divorce. "I do not deserve help, Mom." "You deserve a chance to learn," I told him, "and you are ready now." We drove in silence for a long time. The miles rolled by softly, the way they do when grief and revelation share the same space. When we finally reached the warehouse, Jacob stood in front of it, confused. "Mom, this place looks abandoned." "Maybe on the outside," I said, "not on the inside." I led him into the main office where I had already organized the documents Richard left behind. Contracts, geological reports, corporate agreements, everything laid out carefully, waiting for the moment Richard knew would eventually come. Jacob sat down slowly, his eyes scanning the numbers, then scanning them again, as if his brain could not catch up. These are millions, every quarter. Mom, what is all this?" "Your father's real inheritance," I said, "not the houses, not the image. This?" He looked up at me, eyes filling, finally understanding the weight of the lesson his father had given him. "He knew I would lose everything," Jacob whispered. "He knew Brooke would leave. He knew I would end up here with nothing." "No," I corrected gently. "He knew you needed to lose what did not matter so you could receive what did." Jacob closed his eyes, exhaling a breath that sounded like surrender and awakening at the same time. "Mom, please teach me. I want to do better. I need to do better." And in that quiet Arkansas warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of a future he never expected, my son finally took his first real step into adulthood. The next morning, Jacob arrived at the warehouse before I did. He was standing outside the entrance, a notebook in hand, as if afraid he might miss something important. There was a humility in his posture that I had not seen since he was a teenager trying to fix a bicycle he had taken apart without knowing how to put it back together. He followed me inside and I began with the basics. Not money, not contracts, not even water rights. I started with discipline. If you are going to manage something valuable, you have to learn how to manage yourself first. Jacob nodded, listening more intently than I had ever seen him listen. I showed him the financial reports, the quarterly projections, the environmental compliance requirements. I explained what an aquifer was, how extraction worked, and why sustainable management mattered. His brow furrowed, not from confusion but from the realization of how unprepared he had been for real responsibility. At midday we walked the property. The old metal walls of the warehouse echoed with our steps. Outside, the land stretched wide and quiet, the kind of place most people would overlook. But Jacob saw it differently now. I could tell. He kept pausing to take notes, sketching ideas, whispering calculations under his breath. Later that week, he asked if he could move into the small loft office above the main floor. It was cramped and dusty, with a single window overlooking the gravel lot, but he said it made him feel connected to the work. So he moved his duffel bag upstairs and began treating the warehouse like a home rather than an obligation. He learned to track inventory, monitor extraction levels, negotiate calmly with corporate representatives, and evaluate long-term planning instead of quick fixes. He also learned to live simply, no luxury, no status symbols, just effort, patience, and honesty. One evening, after reviewing a shipment report, Jacob looked at me and said, "I never understood how hard you worked, Mom, or how much Dad carried without showing it." I smiled gently. Most real work happens where no one is watching. Jacob nodded, absorbing the truth like someone seeing his reflection clearly for the first time. He was no longer the man who celebrated borrowed wealth or hid behind someone else's confidence. He was becoming someone steady, someone grounded, someone who knew that building a future required more than luck. It required rebuilding yourself. 1 year after Jacob first stepped into the warehouse with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken sense of direction, the place no longer looked abandoned. The gravel lot had been cleared and leveled. The loading bay had been repaired. The office windows, once fogged with dust and age, now let in clean morning light. It felt less like a storage building and more like the beating heart of something growing. But the most remarkable change was inside. Jacob had turned the warehouse into a functioning training site for young people in the area. Teenagers who had dropped out of school, veterans who needed new skills, parents who wanted a stable income. He talked to each of them with the same gentle seriousness he once reserved only for his closest friends. He taught them how water systems worked, how to maintain equipment, how to read technical manuals, and how to take pride in work that could not be shown off on social media, but built real futures. Every week, more people joined, and every week, Jacob found a way to help one more person take a step they had been afraid to take. One afternoon, as I watched him guide a group through a demonstration on groundwater safety, I realized something unexpected. He was no longer trying to prove anything, not to Brooke, not to his father, not to the world. He was simply living with purpose, and that purpose had begun to ripple outward, touching lives he never imagined he could influence. Local businesses took notice. They donated tools, equipment, even food for training days. The county offered grants. Parents wrote letters thanking Jacob for giving their children something to believe in. He responded with humility every time. "I am just passing on what I learned too late," he would say. But I knew better. He was becoming the kind of leader who did not command attention but naturally earned respect. A man shaped not by wealth or appearance, but by quiet resilience and steady work. Watching him, I felt an old ache soften in my chest. Richard had been right. Jacob had not needed more money. He had needed meaning. And now, standing in the middle of a warehouse that had once been dismissed as worthless, my son had found it. The letter arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon, slipped under the warehouse office door by a courier who looked relieved, just to be out of the storm. I almost set it aside with the usual stack of mail, until I saw the name written in delicate, looping handwriting I recognized immediately. Brooke Harrison. I carried the envelope upstairs to Jacob, who was repairing a valve with 2 of his trainees. When he saw the name, his hands froze. For a moment he simply stared at it, as if unsure whether to open it or throw it away. "Go ahead," I told him softly. He slid a finger under the flap and unfolded a single sheet of paper. The message was short, apologetic, fearful. Brooke had lost her job after being caught manipulating numbers in a marketing campaign. Her new apartment was gone. She was staying with a cousin who barely tolerated her, and she wanted help. Not money, not a place to live, a chance. She asked to join Jacob's program. Jacob read the letter twice before folding it neatly. "Mom, do you think she deserves it?" I chose my words carefully. I think everyone deserves the chance to change, but they never deserve a shortcut. Jacob nodded slowly, letting the truth settle. Then he picked up a pen and wrote a simple reply. "You may apply. The process is the same for everyone." He sealed the envelope and handed it back to me. No bitterness, no anger, just clarity. For the first time, Brooke would have to stand where Jacob once stood. At the starting line of her own lesson. A few months later, I stood outside the warehouse just as the sun began to rise, casting long golden lines across the gravel. The air was cool, quiet, steady. It reminded me of the mornings I used to dream about when life felt too loud and too complicated. Now, watching Jacob walk across the lot with a clipboard in hand and a calm confidence in his step, I realized something important. Richard had not left a warehouse, he had left a path. Jacob greeted the new group of trainees, offering the same patient encouragement he once needed for himself. These young people did not know the weight of his past or the chaos he had survived. What they saw was a man who understood struggle without judgment and responsibility without arrogance. As I watched him guide them through the day's lesson, I felt the quiet press of Richard's memory beside me, like he was standing there too, proud but unseen. Jacob had lost everything he thought mattered, and in doing so, he discovered everything that actually did. The greatest inheritance is not wealth, it is clarity, strength, purpose. If this story reminds you of someone you love, or if it touched your heart in any way, I hope you take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Thank you for watching The Art of Revenge, where every story is a reminder that sometimes